Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining. Hi, Brad, Jesse, Carla. I hope you're looking forward to the discussion this afternoon as much as I am. We have a community or a panel of practitioners here to talk about housing. I think our shared values around housing are increasing production, increasing diversity, and increasing equity in housing. And we're going to talk about how some exciting new trends, green shoots, developments in the housing business, if you will, are contributing to that, and what we as a broader community can do to accelerate and enhance them. So people have biographical information on the panelists. We talked about maybe just as a way of introducing ourselves, each of us is going to share, and Brad, maybe I'll just start with you, kind of one thing that you're working on that's exciting, innovative, and new as a way of just kicking off the session today.
Absolutely. And Adam, thank you so much for having me on. So one thing we're doing that I'm really excited about right now is we're opening our first building designed for families with young children. It's always been a need of mine. Shortly before we started this panel, my 4-year-old ran in while we were doing this recording. He might run in again, so apologies if so, but we're opening a 108-unit urban development in Philadelphia in partnership with Elk Street Management, the developer, targeting families with young children, a lot of family-oriented amenities and units, specifically 2- and 3-bedroom apartments. It's all 2- and 3-bedroom apartments designed for a family's needs. So really excited about that. I know we're going to talk about diversification of housing types and the need for that. And that's one area I'm particularly passionate about.
Yeah, I think it ties into a bunch of things we're going to talk about. Jesse.
Yeah, well, first off, thanks for having me, Adam. One thing we launched recently at Airbnb is Airbnb-friendly apartments. The integrity of the product is to unlock the ability for renters to host their home when they travel to keep up with the cost of living. We launched the product in November of last year with 175 properties across 29 major markets in the United States. Consumers can now go to Airbnb, find apartments that encourage them to host part-time when they travel to keep up with the rising cost of living. And we are expanding that program across the US currently. So we're really, really excited about the program.
Terrific. And Carla.
So yeah, we are a social enterprise development company, social purpose focused development company. And our mandate is to unlock development to create communities where everyone can thrive. So we're very focused on triple bottom line development projects, and in particular, working to solve the housing crisis. So like Brad, one of the most exciting things we have going on is a new project that's coming close to the start of construction soon. It's a project in the heart of Vancouver that is focused on delivering 135 units of mixed income housing. And so it's housing for people of all different income levels, workforce housing, single parent families, and seniors housing. So it's also delivering an intergenerational new model of affordable housing and mixed income housing within one of the most unaffordable cities in the world, which is Vancouver, where I'm based. The other part of this project that is really innovative is it's also delivering on social equity by, this project is being delivered by an all-woman team. So across design and development and construction, we are elevating the leadership of women within the very male-dominated construction and development sectors.
Terrific. Well, exciting stuff. So we've talked about organizing. We have a scant 30 minutes, and we want to cover a lot of what's going on. And so we've talked about organizing our conversation around 3 topics. So we're going to talk some about compact development and how do we kind of further that goal, and does it still have the merits that we've attributed to it over the years. We're going to talk about kind of increasing income and other measures of diversity in housing, and we'll end on a discussion of how lifestyle and demographic changes are driving evolution in housing. And on each of those topics, we're going to ask a handful of questions like, is this real? Is it meaningful? Does it in fact drive housing need and demand? You know, Is it achievable? Is it scalable? Are there things that we can do? Are there signs of change? And then how do we remove barriers to do that? And well, maybe we'll start with you. You've spoken in the past quite a bit about the importance of compact development, the positive merits of it. Interestingly enough, COVID may have shifted us away on, or at least diverted us on the progress we're making against sort of achieving compact development. How do you see it, here in 2023?
Yeah, so I mean, when we think about city building and the concept of creating livable communities and livable cities, whether we work in development or policy making or regulation or design, any part of the continuum that we're on as city builders, which we all are, nothing we do is neutral, right? We're either creating more livable cities or we're dismantling the livability of the cities that we are working and living in. And so we know, and we've known for many decades, what form of development contributes to livability, whether it's, social well-being and health, the finance and economics of what makes good projects in communities, environmental impacts, climate impacts. We know the form of development that creates positive livability from all of those perspectives. So I think, in terms of the form of development and density and such, we always need to be looking at infill development within existing serviced urban areas. Where are there underutilized parcels of land that we can create more density on and more housing supply for people of all income levels and all stages of life? So, this kind of trend that we're all trying to move away from, because we know it's not sustainable and it has many negative impacts, is low density, single use or urban development, right? This form of sprawl and family homes and low density development, we know is a major dismantler of livability. So, in terms of our focus, we're very focused on only infill projects, only, really optimizing density in existing urban areas where we can to add more housing supply for people of all income levels and all stages of life. And the other part of that is, really like, what are the complementary uses that make people's lives better? Can we add co-working spaces within the project, or daycares, or coffee shops, retail spaces that create more mixed use, mixed income projects? So that's really what the focus, I think, needs to be. And the research has been there for decades for us to all sort of know what creates livability in terms of development and development patterns and what dismantles it.
Yeah. Any other thoughts? I mean, one of the things that worries me is that, we're just speaking to ourselves. There's more housing on the fringe. It's less mixed use. I don't think the people are, moving in there think their life is not meaningful today. How do you think about, are we just thinking about a narrow slice of the market, or is it really, scalable, meaningful, broadly experience? Brad or Jesse?
Well, Adam, I mean, you look at where rents have gone in urban centers, particularly, those legacy urban centers that have the characteristics Carla was talking about, that have density, that have walkability, that have transit, even legacy transit systems. Those rents are going through the roof. New York, median rents are higher than they've ever been. So on one hand, you say COVID hit cities. On the other hand, urban rents are at all-time highs by double-digit margins.
Yeah.
It's hard to point to any sprawl as a preference versus an outcome of land use regulation. That's what's allowed. It's a lot easier to go to Texas and build a greenfield subdivision in Frisco than it is to go to Brooklyn and get a rezoning and build a mixed-use project on a formerly industrial site. It's vastly easier, vastly faster to build that greenfield project, which also makes it cheaper. Because when you're building, going through a rezoning in a place like Brooklyn, dealing with discretionary review in California, that adds cost, that adds risk. And so that drives rents higher. So it's tough to really separate out what is preference versus what is the outcome of our land use regime.
Yeah.
Yeah, and Brad, what I would add to that is, occupancies are also at an all-time high. So rents are at an all-time high, occupancies are at an all-time high. Obviously, there's an undersupply of housing in urban markets, no question. What we're focused on, in addition to supporting the majority of new development, is helping people keep up with that cost of living, because wage growth is not increasing at the same levels as rent growth. So, but people are living differently. I mean, roughly half of our business on Airbnb is people staying over 7 nights at a time. And 20 and 25% of our business are people traveling a month at a time. If they have the opportunity to host their home to make some extra money, it's a great opportunity for them to keep up with those rising costs of living while we're also trying to help and support new development in these urban cores.
It's an interesting point, Jesse, and I think a great example of, one of the quirky ways in which, one new product, an idea, your product is not that new, kind of impacts markets. So it's also a good segue to our second topic, which is about how do we increase the diversity of what's being delivered. Maybe a way of thinking about it is sort of moving towards a broader representation of housing, given the broad representation of housing consumers in North America. Brad, you made the good point that, it's just a lot harder to deliver livable places than it is other things. Any thoughts from the group on, what might, begin to sort of open up the spigot, if you will, and, allow us to sort of respond to what we know is an opportunity to serve a broader cross-section of the marketplace?
Yeah, I mean, Carla, go ahead.
No, you go ahead. I just going to jump in because I didn't think you were. Sorry.
Oh, no, sorry, I apologize. Yeah, I mean, at the end of the day, there's a finite amount of development in all these urban markets. And we're all struggling to figure out what the highest and best use of these pieces of land are. When you take a step back and you look at kind of how the world is changing, we believe you should build more housing across economic levels, but optimize that housing in different ways. Why not share your home instead of building incremental hotel rooms on that finite parcel of land to provide more housing for the overall community, and just use it a little differently, as well as use the existing housing stock differently when people are traveling and optimizing their highest expense in their wallet. I mean, roughly, the exact number, you guys might know it, but over 45 to 50% of Americans are cost burdened with rent right now.
Right.
It's mind blowing. So it is a housing shortage, but also an income inequality situation. So why not optimize your largest expense when you travel? Because people are doing that in today's world. Just our overall thought on the housing supply in the markets.
Yeah, I can jump in as well. So, in Canada, our definition of housing affordability is about when you spend 30% of your income or less on housing. And right now, the average Canadian family is spending closer to 50% of their income on housing. And in British Columbia, where I live, it's closer to 60% of their income on housing. And so, when you think about that in terms of creating a livable city and a community that is livable, how livable can our cities and communities be if our essential workforce is being forced out and can't afford to live here? And here's a great example of that. Right now in the city of Vancouver, where I live in British Columbia, the average cost to own a home in Vancouver is 2 to 3 times the salary of a paramedic or firefighter. And so, these essential service workers are commuting hours each day to come into work, and then we're expecting them to save our lives and the lives of our children. So we have a problem with housing diversity and supply for people of all income levels that we need as the basic workforce to keep our cities livable and thriving. So, this is a problem, and this is a problem that, we as city builders, I think, need to be tasked with solving. And when we look at, the majority of housing that's getting supplied in our cities, when we talk about increasing supply, very little of that supply is actually serving those paramedics and the firefighters and the 911 operators and our kids' teachers. That is not who this housing supply is primarily serving in cities globally that are facing a housing crisis. So, for us, it's really that workforce housing, low-income families, seniors, that there's a huge population that isn't being served by an increase in supply. So we really need to think about the affordability of that supply that is the major challenge. And there's a whole discussion to be had about how to achieve that and how to do that. And I don't know that we have the time today, but certainly in our projects, we focus on mixed income housing. So some of the housing is market level, and as much as we can, aside from that, is being served to workforce and creating affordable workforce housing for people at all stages of life.
Yeah. Well, one argument, an optimistic argument, might be that there's just not been a market need to figure out how to do this, right, Carla? You're doing it from a sense of social mission, but it's just been too easy to build to the common denominator, to serve the upscale market, to build, whatever is easy and acceptable and financeable. Mm-hmm. But that as the markets get more complicated, or maybe if we can just increase the level of supply, people begin to be incentivized, have a reason to experiment, figure out, do something new. I mean, Brad, you guys, for a variety of reasons, figured out how to do something new. Like, is there a chance that we're sort of entering into the golden age in which creativity, market need, opportunity can kind of get that at a more wholesale outcome?
Well, I know we're going to talk about changing lifestyles and I want to speak to that. But one thing I wanted to mention in terms of, how valuable additional housing supply is. If you look at the advertisements for what today are Class C workforce housing, affordable by its age and location, low-rise apartments that we today look at and say this is an essential part of our housing stock. You look at the ads for those apartments when they were first built in the 1980s or 1970s, luxury housing. Yeah. And it's a really important thing to remember is that housing is not static over time. Its needs change. It changes as the needs of the city, the needs of the neighborhood, the needs of the workforce change. And frankly, a lot of housing filters down over time. That is, today's luxury housing is tomorrow's workforce housing. And it doesn't, you walk into, say, a 2000 vintage 5/1, it's a mid-rise residential building, and you see this in action. Things are a little bit more dated. They're not able to get rent increases. Their high-end tenants are getting poached by the beautiful new glass tower down the street. Different audiences moving in. So it's really important to understand that housing is not static over time, and that today's luxury housing is often tomorrow's workforce housing.
It's a great point. I think it's also true that, policy drives us towards a monolithic housing production.
Yes.
Right? I'm blanking on the name of the famous Chilean architect, right? Who, pioneered this idea that you can deliver half the house. It used to be considered a great sin that, a kitchen was delivered without a refrigerator, but maybe we just need to think back to sort of a more, organic and evolutionary model of what kind of housing can people afford? How do they improve it over time? How do they grow into it? mean, Jesse, you guys have the problem of, I think your product is misunderstood. You think it sort of plays a role in broadening and actually adding to the health of the housing market. How do you respond to that?
Yeah, well, it's really interesting. We are misunderstood a lot of the time. I mean, since we rolled out this program, we survey all the residents in the Airbnb friendly program as well as across Airbnb. The overwhelming majority of Airbnb hosts use the money simply to keep up with the rising cost of living.
Right.
They're using it to keep up with inflation. So I do feel like we get a bad rap a lot of times in a variety of markets, when at the core of our business, in the core of Airbnb, when Brian and Joe and Nate started the company, they started it to pay rent. And the whole concept started with throwing a couple of air mattresses on the floor when there was a convention in town to pay rent. So we do view the opportunity of Airbnb as really unlocking economic power for individuals to keep up with the cost of living. And we didn't expect COVID, nobody did, but the world's changed dramatically since then. And now people's lives and the way they live are also changing dramatically. And I second Brad's comment earlier about all housing, incremental supply for the most part is good. And we just need to continue to work diligently to add more housing across the board.
I think that's right.
I just want to add something that I don't think we've touched on yet on this topic, which is when we talk about diversifying housing production, the landscape that we're in financially makes that much more challenging to do than it was a decade ago or even 5 years ago, because of rising construction costs that have escalated during COVID, supply issues, and obviously the financial environment that we're in with interest rate increases. And, one of the challenges that we're facing in providing these mixed income projects for people at all stages of life and all income levels and kind of mixing them into a new model of housing delivery is delivering these projects is kind of like a web. You need a lot of relaxation on zoning and density to really optimize the amount of housing units on any particular parcel of land. So you're optimizing density so you can optimize revenue from the project that can be used to kind of cross-subsidize some of the more affordable housing units or the more lower income units. So you need all of the city compliance on density optimization. You need city compliance on expedited approvals. And some cities are more amenable to that than others. So that's kind of a challenge in itself, that some cities are more amenable to lots of, optimizing the density and the approval, the timeline expeditiously. The other area there's a major challenge is in the finance landscape. To deliver diversity in housing production from an affordability perspective, we really need to work with and find lenders who are a bit non-traditional, right? They have to value that triple bottom line delivery of housing, and they're not just looking to kind of optimize their ROI on the project. So you really need investors and lenders that value, are willing to take a kind of lower return, longer term horizon to make these projects work and to make the projects viable.
Yeah, good point. I actually think the finance community will prove to be over time more open to this than we think. Mm-hmm. There's a supply problem there too. There's not enough interesting and of scale, socially conscious housing opportunities for the capital markets to respond to. So I think the increase in the production is part of the solution to that problem too. Well, maybe transitioning to our third topic, and it's probably a good presage to the last part of today, which is about making cities lovable. I think one of the things that makes communities vibrant and livable today is that they're diverse. The customer base is more varied than ever. What constitutes a household is a wider array of options than it's ever been. And there's an opportunity for housing to respond to that. Brad, maybe I'll start with you because I think your product sort of perceived one of many lifestyle demographic changes and respond to it. And maybe we can, as our last topic, hear a little bit about that. And then as a group, sort of think about some other things that are emerging or might emerge and how that makes our cities lovable and livable.
Absolutely. So when we started Common in 2015, one thing we saw was that the product that is being built by developers, which tends to be fairly standardized across different residential assets, doesn't map particularly well to the various ways that people live. And in some instances can kind of end up driving the conclusion. I'll get to what I mean by that. So one area we saw an opportunity in were people who live with roommates. 25 million Americans share a home or apartment with someone they're not related to. Nobody, at least in 2015, were building apartments with roommates in mind. What people who lived with roommates would do is they would go find a 2 or maybe 3 bedroom apartment. They would put a fake wall up in the living room. They would share bathrooms, and that was their that was their apartment, and that was how they achieved housing affordability for their for their lifestyle, for the way they lived. You see the same thing with families today. Now, a lot of developers have caught on, particularly in urban centers, that you want to design apartments with roommates in mind. And so a lot of the 2 and 3 bedroom apartments you see are designed for roommates, not for families. And there's some very subtle differences. So now the bathrooms, you usually have private bathrooms for each bedroom. The bedrooms are way too big. The living rooms are too small. Yes. There's kind of a litany of small design things that separate an apartment kind of designed for anyone and everyone versus something designed for a specific use case. One thing I started about 6 months ago is a newsletter series that every week we profile a different set of developers diving into a given thesis. It's called Thesis Driven. And one I profiled a couple weeks ago, we're building housing for multi-generational households, typically immigrant families where you have grandparents, aunts, uncles, parents, kids, all in one household. So we're talking 5, 6, 7 bedroom townhomes. That really blew me away and thought it was incredibly cool. But you're seeing more developers think about these different typologies in new ways. How do we target the way people really live today and not just the unit mix that I've done for my past 20 projects? And Carla made a great point that lenders are a big bottleneck in this ecosystem. You do anything outside the norm and they're going to ask questions. What I will add is I think it's an opportunity on the other side of this challenge is that the pain that a lot of developers are feeling now, that the normal thing isn't penciling. Mm-hmm. The thing you've been doing for the past 20 years, given construction costs, given financing costs, it isn't working anymore. Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing more developers say, how do we make this pencil? Right. How do we make this work? Is there something creative we can do, whether it is incorporating higher density units like micro apartments, like co-living, whether it's tapping into triple bottom line capital that is going to push me away from the traditional studios 1s and 2s have already done. So I'm trying to profile newsletter a different theme every week that some GPs are tackling to square the circle.
Yeah, but I like this idea. Maybe in this case, necessity again becomes the mother of invention in housing. Just Absolutely. You spoke to this a little bit earlier. I think that the unexpected ways in which, your product can respond to sort of different lifestyles, different ways in which people are using a home, sharing a home, families, couples. How do you internally sort of discuss the ways in which the change in customer dynamics creates actually an opportunity?
Yeah, to Brad and Carla's point, it's a huge opportunity. People are living differently. and they are, development is changing. And in Brad, these numbers aren't penciling when rents, as you mentioned, are at
Right.
all-time highs.
Right.
So something needs to change to make these deals work, to add this supply. And, in addition to optimize the existing supply better. But we're very blessed at Airbnb. We're in almost every city in the world, except minus a couple of countries. And what's really interesting is just the way people are living and the way people are traveling. People are still going to New York, they're still going to Paris, but they're also going to places that you never expected, and they're going longer. So, this remote work, it's not a fad, it's real. Now, people may still go to the office 3 days a week, some may go 4, but people have more flexibility. And building cities with this flexibility in mind is paramount to the growth of these cities. In addition, it brings incremental tax revenue to these cities through Airbnb. And it's really an opportunity, and we love the opportunity to partner with developers and cities to come up with the right situation for the circumstance in which that city plays in.
Yeah. Carla, maybe pulling up one thing you said earlier, which is we're talking a little bit about the diversity of housing or people that housing serves. You talked a little bit earlier about the diversity of people delivering the housing.
Mm-hmm.
What role do you think that has in maybe creating an ecosystem in which there's more innovation, just broadening the diversity of us as a community of housers?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point. Yeah, certainly when you bring diversity of people delivering housing, diversity of people who are acting, as developers, you bring a different lens and certainly a different approach to creating and delivering development projects. And we've seen that in our projects in many, many, many different ways. But one of the things is just not kind of doing what Brad talked about, which is just doing the same thing over and over, taking a different approach, bringing a different lens, delivers a different project in and of itself. So one of the things that we're doing is, delivering housing for diverse people of different income levels. And as I said, different stages of life. So workforce housing, for instance, that we're delivering, there's millennials getting, we're working with projects that we're delivering for millennials. What we're learning is a lot of millennials who are in the workforce don't want to own a car. They would prefer not to have a car. And maybe that's out of necessity because the cost's too high with the housing costs they're paying. They can't afford a car. But many of them choose not to own a car. And so, what we're doing with that is actually creating huge value and opportunity by not delivering as much parking in our projects. Underground parking right now, FYI, costs $100,000 per stall. So what we're doing with that is we're getting huge parking relaxations from the city on our projects. And then for the $100,000 per stall that we are saving and getting these huge parking relaxations that we're negotiating, is we're taking that and we're reinvesting that back into the affordability of the project versus adding it to our bottom line. We're really looking at how do we take these savings, reduce the parking, meet this new demographic trend, and create more affordability with that cost saving in the project.
Well, if the topic of the day is innovation, that's maybe a good place to end it. A big, hairy problem that maybe can be, if not solved, at least we can work against it. So I think we are actually at about the end of our time. Thanks, everybody. Three things that kind of, came up again and again in the conversation. One, just how important increasing the production of housing is. Two, that, livable places are filled with, quirky solutions and some like delightful and beneficial consequences intended and unintended. And that, maybe the change in the markets that we're living through kind of actually create a more hospitable ecosystem for innovation, which would be a terrific outcome. Thanks everybody for joining. We'll turn people over to the last discussion of the program around lovable cities. Thanks everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.